As you're starting to progress the deal to a point where they need to make some form of decision, an objection is somebody's trying to come to a point of decision, but they're lacking information. It's our job.
Why?
Because people buy.
Do you find that ghosting can often occur when you've lost trust?
93% of the decisions people make is emotion-based, and then they justify it with logic.
How do you handle that objection if that person isn't in the room or part of the calls? How do you manage the people that are not there?
In this episode, you're going to learn how to manage objections without creating tension in the process.
I love this one. You recently shared a call that you had where the objections you faced were really valid.
Yep.
There was some, real concerns by this buyer. They went nitty gritty. They seek that advice from their lawyer, their finance partner. So their objections were quite solid. But the way you handled that, the way you addressed it and acknowledged was a bit of a masterclass. So I'm sort of setting you up here. Hopefully your head hasn't gone too big, but walk us through, give us a bit of context and walk us through how you manage that.
Yeah, so with most deals, right, this is why it's important that, because time will kill your deal, and you want to make sure that, and obviously giving them the right space to get the level of information they need to get to a point of decision. But as you're starting to progress the deal to a point where they need to make some form of decision, there will always be questions that they have as part of the process. Now, it's our job. This is, again, biggest takeaway. Doesn't matter if you've been in sales for 1 day or 20 years. We see this often, that completely kills deals, is the lack of information being shared, right? So an objection is a request for more information before I move forward, right? It's not a negative. It's actually a positive. An objection is somebody's trying to come to a point of decision, but they're lacking information. It's our job. What a great salesperson, what a great guide. When I say salesperson, professional, guide, mentor, facilitator, what they'll do is they will share the information that they know the buyer needs to make a decision. They won't wait for those information gaps to come up. So maybe in this case that you're saying, yeah, I worked it through, just like Maldini used to say, if you're already on the floor tackling, you've already made a mistake as a defender, right? And you were always on the floor, Dave, by the way. But maybe in this case, this is a great example of I pushed the deal too fast and he had too many information gaps, right? So it could be I was at fault in that deal.
You brought this on yourself.
Potentially, right?
We made a mistake?
Potentially, yeah. But because in this particular circumstance, he had a number of people he needed to get guidance from. He needed an accountant, he needed his lawyer, he needed someone from finance. So he had a few people. They were sort of sharing some info, and what happened is it created a level of concern, yeah? So when that concern started to come up to the surface, this is a key takeaway from this episode is don't respond. Don't actually respond to what they're sharing. Allow them a space to share, drop your tone, accept their position, and ask them to share as many concerns as they have. And when they've shared it, confirm what you've heard and ask for more. And you heard that call, Dave. That's all I did. I accepted his position. I thanked him. I said, look, I really appreciate your feedback. The concerns that you shared are valid, right? So I dropped my tone, I accepted his position, and I thanked him. I showed gratitude. Then I said, do you mind me asking, outside of X, what are some of the other concerns that you've also got?
So you tried to see if there's any more.
Correct. And you heard him. He's like, and this and that and the other. And then once I got a full picture, I had a full understanding, again, I confirmed. What I'm hearing is A, B, C.
Now, behind the scenes, were you sort of writing these down so you could address them?
Yep.
Okay.
And again, I've got the call. Obviously, we transcribe it. This is a great one. Like, I'm going to talk to you, remind me about the AI component to this.
Yep.
But essentially, once I heard all these concerns, you've got to confirm. What we often see when we're doing deal reviews is most sellers will respond immediately. And I want you to think of objection handling like it's like an iceberg. Only a certain portion of the iceberg sits above water. The real concern is underneath. And it's our job to go underneath. It's our job to go to the bottom of that iceberg to find out the root cause. Now, once I did that on the call, I heard what he had to say, I confirmed, right? I allowed him to feel like, you know what, this guy's hearing what I have to say. He's not trying to respond and sell me a solution.
Yeah, so you basically,
Correct.
Read back, what you've taken from
Exactly.
his concerns. So he understood, you knew his situation.
Yep.
And then what did you do?
And then I thanked him once again. and I asked his permission if I could work or share with him how other people have tackled those particular concerns.
Why?
Because people buy similar to the way other people like them purchase. So it's an element of social proof.
Okay.
And by telling him, hey, these are concerns, you know what, you're not alone. Other people like you at this stage often have these questions and these concerns come up, right? So it's actually a good thing that you're thinking like this. I wouldn't expect you not to have these concerns based on the decision that you're about to make. So again, you're validating, you're making them feel like, you know what, it's okay for me to feel like this. We as salespeople, we can't guilt people to buy, right? We're not leveraging a manipulative straight line sales process. For anybody out there, straight line sales process, we shouldn't say Jordan Belfort, right? But we're not manipulating we're not using a manipulative sales tactic here, right? Especially when we are selling enterprise grade deals. I mean, this deal was it's about a $900 to $1 million deal. There's a lot of anxiety that can sit behind it. There's a lot of concern, and it's a massive investment.
Yeah.
We've got to validate that. We've got to go, you know what, we expect you. We wouldn't want you to move forward unless all your concerns are ticked off, right? It's making them feel like, you know what, this guy's here to support me.
Look, and the same can be said for even if it's a $5,000, $10,000
It's exactly
deal.
the same process.
Because if they're investing in that product or service, they're allocating that budget versus doing something else that can move the business forward.
And I've got calls selling a $50 weekly membership for a recovery center using that same process.
That's right. It's all relative.
Exactly the same. You just obviously gear it depending on who you're talking to. So what happened once we went through that process, heard his concerns, asked permission, would it be okay if I share? Would you mind if I share ABC? He said, yep. I worked through one by one. And then I checked to ensure that he was okay as I progressed. So check, does that help, right? Any other questions about that, et cetera, et cetera? He said, yep, great. And what happened at the end? You heard the call.
That's right. He then accepted, okay, now I'm ready to push this forward.
So he didn't push this forward to decision. He said, I'm happy to go to the next step.
Yeah.
But the message that we got first was, I'm out.
Yeah, it was a hard line. I'm out.
I'm done.
Yeah, he
I don't wanna
accepted the
move
call
forward.
out of
Correct.
courtesy to say thank you, and he's basically was leaving.
And we were able to move it. Now, we haven't got him to a point of, yes, I'm ready to sign the contract, but we've got him back into the zone of, I'm at a point I want to evaluate this business case. Yeah. So the mindset completely shifted. And we know why, because there's task tension. When we ask people to make a decision, task tension kicks in. It's our job to manage that tension. Tension's good because it means people have to get to a point of decision. But what can often happen is task tension can stop people from taking action, right? And if you're not careful, if you're responding too early, if you're trying to sell them or manipulate them to a point of decision, what they'll do, they'll just leave. That's when ghosting is when they will ghost you to a point where the trust levels have gone. So once task tension occurs, you try to sell, relationship tension kicks in. Relationship tension is no good because it means there's no trust.
So do you find, that's a good point there, do you find that ghosting can often occur when you've lost trust?
Correct, when you're pushing your agenda.
Okay.
This is why I say don't handle the objection. You don't handle it, you've got to manage it. You've got to manage the concern that's sitting behind it. There's emotion sitting there. 93% of the decisions people make is emotion-based, and then they justify it with logic. Right? Nobody wants to feel forced to buy, right? But they want to be in control of making a decision. So this is where we've got to this is where the science of selling goes to the side and the art of selling kicks in. This is where tonality, your intuition takes play, know when to speed up, know when to decrease, yeah? You've got to start to manage that conversation and manage the tension. Again, you can do it on B2C products, you can do it in enterprise sales. It's exactly the same process, yeah? It's about understanding that the person making the decision is a human, right? Doesn't matter if they're spending their own money or they're spending a company's money. In fact, there's a lot more emotion when you're spending your company's money.
How so?
Because if you fuck up, it's on you, right? And the organization's going to say, hey, you've just made a mistake with a certain amount of cash from the balance sheet. If it's my personal money, okay, I stuff up, I answer to me or answer to my family. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there can be, especially if you've been in an organization where they've had issues occur in the past, where spending has been, you've used money, it hasn't worked, It's got a heightened sense of, you know what, we can't fail here. That's why 40 to 60% of deals in the enterprise world end up in no decision. They don't progress. It's because people fear. They have a fear that their internal team might not be able to execute on X initiative, or they fear that what you say about your product or service might not actually do what you say. Again, 40 to 60% of deals.
That's a big trust and brand
massive.
issue.
Right? So this is, again, why you need to manage that. And especially if you think about enterprise deals, Dave, what do we got? We've got 9 to 13 people are involved in the buying committee. It's not like one person. There's quite a few. So there's going to be varying degrees of trust across that buying committee. So you've got to make sure that if there are people in the committee that you're not seeing, you've got to draw out the concern anyway. This is where you need to leverage your champion. And we can go and we're moving away from managing objections, but this is why there's so many nuances to mid-market and enterprise sales we need to be thinking about, because there's so many people involved in that buying committee, right? So again, this is where buyer enablement kicks in further to go, right, what's the information that committee needs to have in order to get to a decision? How does it reflect the CFO's role? How does it reflect the COO, procurement, right? Risk, like we know this. Big companies, they've got a person that assesses tech platforms before they can say yes to make sure it meets security, right? That's an objection. If you don't handle it early, it's going to kill your deal.
How do you handle that objection if that person isn't in the room or part of the calls? How do you manage the people that are not there?
Because we're the experts. We've sold this 100 times. We know how organizations buy. The person we're selling to might buy our product or service once every 1, 2, 3, 5 years. They don't know potential objections that are going to come up in their organization.
So this is about helping them.
We need to enable them. We need to say, hey, typically what happens at this stage, I'll give you an example. You're selling into an enterprise organization. They're using Ariba, right, as their purchasing platform. We know in order to get a new vendor set up in Ariba, you have to have 3 quotes, for example. In most cases, some organizations say, when you put this in, you need to have 3 quotes to show that you've done your due diligence and that you've accepted this particular vendor. If you know that and you haven't found that out, it's going to slow your deal down. So you got to find out, have they got the right information to put into the system? Otherwise, it's going to slow down my deal. Tech, risk, have they looked at from a risk profile? Have we ticked the boxes to make sure? We've seen this with a very large video tech business that we did some coaching with. They were in with one of our other clients. There was 2 vendors. One they wanted to buy, but they couldn't because it didn't meet, I think it was their SPAC requirements or something, Dave. They didn't meet their tech security requirements and they couldn't buy from them, right? So they had to go to the other vendor, which wasn't their first choice, yeah? So again, this is why we need to think as a professional, what are the barriers? What are the concerns that the other person will have? And how can I help them through that process to go all the way back to that particular call? That's why I said, potentially, I didn't prepare the buyer to have the right conversation with his lawyer, right? And with his accountant. So that's potentially on me, not the buyer, but the way in which we then managed his tension and his concern is a process that you can leverage off every call.
Just wanted to reiterate that Louis stuffed up on that one there. Louis stuffed up. All right. So you mentioned earlier about, to remind you, how you leverage AI to help you in this process. Talk me through it.
So this is what I love about AI, right? You can take your calls. So go back, if you're recording your Zoom calls or your discovery calls or your prospecting calls, whichever call, take the last 100, 200, whatever it is, get them, throw the file into ChatGPT and ask it to review the calls and come up with the 6 most common questions that have come up on all those calls. They're the objections. Then once you've got them, that's the content you need to build responses around to share with the prospect earlier or to bring those questions up earlier in the sales process, because once you bring them up first, you've neutralized them, right? So you've actually killed the objection before they raise it, which is a really powerful tactic to manage objections.